Yeah. I mean, it was stolen.
Go ahead and do a buzzer check, Sauron.
Whoa, wait, these buzzers are both green.
Yeah.
Are you guys ready to start?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah.
This packet is by Delaware A, Kentucky A, and Cambridge A. Toss up one. Like its composer's opera about Elizabeth of England, this opera's overture is directly taken from that of Aureliano in Palmyra. When asked to turn over a love letter, a girl in this opera hands over a laundry list instead. Its overture's F minor second theme features a motif of 3 staccato eighth notes, followed by 2 slurred ones, in an example of the composer's iconic crescendo. A tone below the original D major is usually used to sing its aria about gossip titled La Calunnia. Arias in this opera include one sung before the music teacher Don Basilio arrives, titled Una voce poco fa, and one in which the title character repeats his name before the patter section, titled Largo al Fattori. -5. For 10 points, name this opera about Count Almaviva's attempts to woo Rosina, written by Gioacchino Rossini. Yes. And your bonus. In his article, Action Research and Minority Problems, this thinker argued in favor of defining groups not by the similarity of their individuals, but by interdependence of fate. For 10 points each, name this social psychologist who helped to develop the methods of sensitivity training during his time as director of MIT's Center for Group Dynamics.
Wait, what is he? A sociologist.
Answer. Kurt Lewin. In an equation first articulated in his Principles of Topological Psychology, Lewin argued that this trait is a function of a person and their environment. A psychological school of thought named for this trait was promoted by John Watson.
That's behavior, right? Behavior.
Yes. Lewin introduced this term into American psychology in his book A Dynamic Theory of Personality. It describes the levels of positivity or negativity associated with particular emotions.
Affect.
It's valence. 10 points on the bonus. Toss-up 2. The organization ICARDA received the first authorized transfer from one of these locations to help it recover from the Syrian civil war. The largest of these locations was established by a Millennium Commission awarded to a royal organization based in Kew. In March 2017, a so-called World Archive was opened next to one of these locations that was built into an abandoned coal mine near Longyearbyen. Workers at the Vavilov Institute guarded one of these.
Seed vaults?
Yes.
Oh,
10 points. Your bonus. This character asked whether or not an opponent is an immortal in disguise before cunningly trading a bronze object for a gold one. For 10 points each, name this king of Argos who traded his armor with Glaucus at the end of his Aristia in Book 6 of the Iliad.
Yeah, I think so.
Diomedes refused to fight Glaucus because his grandfather had given hospitality to this man, who was Glaucus' grandfather. This man killed the Chimera and tried to fly to Mount Olympus on Pegasus.
Okay, yeah, killer.
After he is killed by Ajax, Glaucus' body is rescued by this man, who was later carried out of battle by Poseidon after Apollo convinced him to fight Achilles. This man leads Troy's Dardanian allies.
Is it? I feel like that's
What is it?
Sarapedon.
I don't know.
I have no idea. Sarapedon.
Aeneas.
Oh,
20 points. Toss-up 3. This character is said to split an opponent like a muscle in a passage where he set himself ablaze. The return of a stolen statue of this character is predicted in a document called his Prophecy that tells of a journey to Hati. That prophecy about this character was used for propaganda on the Cyrus cylinder, which was found at the shrine to this character at Esagila. To allow the gods to rest, this character created humans by using the blood of a vizier who commanded legions of monsters against him named Kingu. This net...
Marduk.
Yes.
Yes.
For 10 points. Bonus. Samples undergoing a form of this technique are mixed with crystallized molecules of cinnamic acid derivatives in water or acetonitrile for 10 points each. Name this technique that sorts compounds by the ratio of their namesake property to charge. Moiety and electrospray ionization are ways of generating ions in this analytic technique.
Mass spec.
A common counter-ion source added to boost the signal in moiety is this compound, which is 34,000 times more likely to lose a proton than the glacial compound of which it is a derivative due to several halogens stabilizing an OH bond via the inductive effect. Answer.
And I answer.
trifluoroacetic acid, or TFA. The presence of an M and N+2 peak of the same height on a mass spectrogram indicates the presence of this halogen, which is a brown liquid at room temperature and is 2 rows below fluorine on the periodic table. Yes, 20. Toss-up 4. Examining the spectrum of a quantization of the classical Hamiltonian H equals xp yields a result similar to this statement according to the Berry-Keating conjecture. This statement is implied by the stronger Mertens conjecture, which was proven to be false in 1985. Adolf Plitz formulated a generalized version of this statement that applies to Dirichlet L series, which reduces to the standard version when all terms in the series have numerator 1. This statement, which was introduced in the 1859 paper...
Riemann hypothesis.
Yes, number 10. Bonus. This goddess presided over a pissing contest between the booksellers Curl and Chetham, which Chetham won by streaming a burning arc over his own head, while his opponent splashed his own face. For 10 points each. Name this goddess who crowns either Louis Theobald or Kali Sibber, respectively, as her new king in the 3 or 4 book edition of a mock heroic poem.
So this is probably like the Rape of Bach.
Oh, it's like
Answer.
Belinda.
Dullness. As repayment for being saved by Sibber from being crushed by an overweight prostitute at a brothel, this poet of the Rape of the Lock cast him as the king of dullness in the Dunciad.
Both, right?
Yeah.
Both.
Because he is found to be mature in dullness from his tender years, Thomas Shadwell is appointed successor to a mediocre English poet in this mock heroic poem by John Dryden.
McFlutmouth.
20. Toss-up 5. Apart from A, this is the first word in the title of a poem that opens, I'll tell thee now, dear love, what thou shalt do to anger destiny as she doth us. T.S. Eliot wrote that a poem whose title starts with this word demands considerable agility to comprehend the double comparison of a globe to a tear, and of a tear to a deluge. Poems of this type of the book, and of weeping, appear in the volume Songs and Sonnets alongside a third example describing a love interassured of the mind, careless eyes, lips, and hands to miss. The speaker asserts 'twere profanation of our joys to tell the laity our love in that poem titled for this genre, which asserts, thy firmness makes my circle just, and makes me end where I begun, at the end of an extended metaphor comparing 2 souls to points -5 to points on a compass. For 10 points, John Donne wrote what type of farewell address forbidding mourning?
Valediction.
Yes. 10. Bonus. The occupation probability for a microstate in this system is equal to the negative exponential of the state's energy over k sub b times t, all divided by the partition function. For 10 points each. Name this construct that describes a system in thermal equilibrium with a heat bath at fixed temperature. It is characterized by the number of particles, the absolute temperature, and the volume.
So that's, I'm pretty sure that's canonical ensemble.
Yes, the distribution of states in the canonical ensemble is named for either Josiah Willard Gibbs or this Austrian inventor of statistical mechanics, who also names the constant k sub b that appears in the distribution. Yes, the microcanonical ensemble describes identical physics to the canonical ensemble, but considers a collection of microstates in which this quantity, rather than temperature, is held constant.
It's just energy. Energy.
Yes, 30.
Good job.
Toss-up 6. A design featuring pelicans and grapevines in this painting is situated above text that says "Youth without age" on his forehead on a step behind a crown. Popes Martin V and Gregory VII and the anti-pope Alexander V are seen together in a crowd in this painting beneath John the Baptist holding a book. Depictions of John the Baptist and John the Evangelist in grisaille are located below 2 empty panels separating Gabriel and Mary in this painting's Annunciation, which is located above a portrait of its patron, Jodocus Veit, on its closed view. In this painting, Adam is positioned above a replacement for a stolen panel depicting the just...
They get all their B's.
Yes, 10 points. Bonus, name some things about Italian politics between the Risorgimento and the rise of fascism, for 10 points each. This prime minister, for Victor Emmanuel II, managed to gain critical French support for the Risorgimento and often feuded with Garibaldi. He died only 3 months into his term as first prime minister of a united Italy. Italy's liberal period was marked by this practice of empowering moderates to reduce partisanship. Devised by Agostino de Pretis and mastered by Giovanni Giolitti, it mainly entailed massive corruption in practice.
Maybe
Torno? It's like a Spanish thing. The Torno.
Transformismo. Vittorio Orlando was lambasted for only gaining a mutilated victory in the negotiations at this conference, since Clemenceau's advocacy for its war guilt clause and Wilson's support of self-determination took precedence.
Yeah.
Versailles.
Yes. 20.
Sorry, I was thinking through. You were good.
Toss-up 7. A writer from this present-day country was said to have created the strongest narcotic of his century by saying that history should be written as what actually happened. The leading figure of this country's youngest historical school was the author of the 6-volume history series, Modern Capitalism. Another of this country's historians wrote a 3-volume history of Rome, which won him a Nobel Prize in 1903. A universal history up to the time of ancient Greece was attempted by this country's leading 19th century historian, who wrote the essay The Great Powers and pioneered emphasis on primary sources. Many historians were influenced by an idealist from this country who effectively stated Africa has no history. Yes. Bonus, the blood of Christ takes an unlikely trajectory and lands on the head of this artist in the Weimar altarpiece, which was completed by his son after his death. For 10 points each, name this artist who used an image of a winged snake with a ring in its mouth as his signature. He painted many scenes of Cupid and Venus, as well as a diptych of a nude Adam and Eve against a black background.
I don't know.
This possibly be like Chronic the Younger. No.
Go for it.
Answer.
Chronic
Prompt.
the Younger.
Nope, the Elder.
Oh no.
Cranach painted Frederick the Wise engaging in this action outside Hartenfels Castle. Anthony van Dyck painted Charles I and his horse during a break from this action, which is done in the snow in a Bruegel painting.
So like hunting.
Huh?
Hunting. Because it's Hunterson's
Oh.
Oh yeah, hunting.
Yes, in a Cranach painting titled
Sorry.
for this emotion, a woman whittles away at a stick, ignoring the 15 babies dancing next to her. Another 16th century artwork titled for this emotion includes a truncated polyhedron with a faint skull marking on it and a magic square.
Yeah, right.
Is it
Melancholy.
Yes.
Yeah.
20.
The-
Toss-up 8. Defects in SIRF1, which partakes in the biogenesis of an enzyme in this process, are linked to central nervous system degeneration in Lee syndrome. That enzyme in this process possesses an unusual cross-link between the side chain rings of its tyrosine 244 and histidine 240, enabling the function of its binuclear copper center. The protein that generates heat in brown adipose tissue, thermogenin, counteracts the chemical gradient induced by this process as an uncoupler. A free radical intermediate, called semiquinone, is reduced to ubiquinol as part of the Q cycle carried out by cytochrome BC1 in this process. Oxygen acts as the final acceptor of this process, whose
So just like cellular respiration.
prompt.
So like the electron transport chain.
Yes.
Couldn't come up with that.
Bonus. A way of seeing that was simultaneously not a way of seeing led to this event according to Nick Pidgeon's book Handmade Disasters, a classic text in safety literature. For 10 points each. Identified this 1986 event that killed school teacher Krista McAuliffe and prompted the formation of the Rogers Commission.
Oh, yeah.
The Challenger disaster.
Yes.
Place at 18.
This physicist demonstrated the failure of O-rings in low temperatures by submerging one in a cup of ice water as a member of the Rogers Commission.
What? Yeah, it's someone famous like that, right? Feynman.
Yes, this speechwriter quoted a John McGee poem mentioning the surly bonds of Earth for Ronald Reagan's address following the Challenger disaster. She wrote the speech in which George H.W. Bush promised, "Read my lips, no new taxes."
I think that's okay. Newman.
30.
Good job. I saw her name once and then I.
Toss-up 9. Restrictions after one of these events forced a contingent of old believers to relocate to Rogozhskoye. A column formed by 9 angels was erected during one of these events in Vienna by Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I. The Loimologia of Nathaniel Hodges chronicles one of these events, during which a diarist claimed, "I had never lived so merrily." A 1631 of these events that forced Venice to use the Lazzaretto Vecchio is depicted in great detail in the novel The Betrothed. Another of these events popularized a religious movement whose members traveled around whipping themselves.
Yeah.
Plagues.
Yes.
Yeah. It's plague or fire.
Your bonus. In this film, an entire town waits all night to see a cruise liner, which promptly causes all of their boats to capsize. For 10 points each, name this movie that begins with a festival at the start of spring, in which an effigy of a witch is burned.
What is big? Bitch. I have no idea.
Answer.
Rules of the game.
Amarcord. This other film by the director of Amarcord ends with clowns making a circus out of the spaceship movie set for a film that its protagonist Guido Anselmi canceled due to writer's block.
That's 8.5. Fellini.
8.5. Amarcord and 8.5 were directed by Federico Fellini, who hailed from this country. Other directors from this country, such as Sergio Leone, produced low-budget spaghetti westerns.
Italy.
Yes.
Let's make sure we don't.
Sorry.
10 points on that bonus. Toss-up 10. This novel enjoins the reader to consult a metaphysical professor should they ever be athirst in the great American desert, since, as everyone knows, meditation and water are wedded forever. The narrator of this novel contrasts his quiet inclinations with the philosophical flourish with which Cato throws himself upon his sword. It opens with an etymology across 13 languages for a word that appears in this novel's full title, followed by a series of extracts compiled by a sub-librarian of that word's appearances in past literature. In its first numbered chapter, Loomings, the narrator confesses that whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, then I count it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. For 10 points, name this novel that opens, Call Me Ishmael.
Moby Dick.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bonus. The title character of a 2003 novel brings up one of these beings as an example of what she believes in while being interrogated by a panel of judges at a prison camp deliberating her entry into the afterlife. For 10 points each, identify these beings whose appearances in the writings of the philosophers and the poets are the subject of a metafictional novella styled as a pair of guest lectures delivered by the author's alter ego, Elizabeth Costello.
Spirits, right? Sure. Spirits.
Animals. The protagonist of this novel by the same author develops compassion for the dogs that he euthanizes at Bev Shaw's animal shelter, where he works after being forced to resign as an English professor after sleeping with a student.
This is disgrace. Disgrace.
Yes. This South African writer expressed his concern for animal welfare throughout novels such as The Lives of Animals, Elizabeth Costello, The Life and Times of Michael Kay, and Disgrace. Yes, 20. Halftime.
We got 2:15:75.
Yeah.
All right.
We're not out of this yet, guys.
Toss up 11. For Dirichlet boundary conditions, this quantity is given by the volume integral of the charge density times the Green's function. During a gauge transformation, this quantity is replaced by its original value minus the time derivative of the gauge function. By applying the law of cosines and writing this quantity in terms of Legendre polynomials, one obtains its multipole expansion. In empty space, this quantity has no local extrema due to Earnshaws.
Scalar potential.
That's correct. Your bonus? Answer the following about the enzyme chymotrypsin, which is often studied as a model of protein structure and function, 10 points each. Chymotrypsin preferentially cleaves proteins that can fit a tyrosine, tryptophan, or phenylalanine side chain ring into a pocket named for this property, defined as the tendency of some compounds to repel water.
Hydrophobic. Yeah. Hydrophobic.
Yes, chymotrypsin is classified as a protease named for this amino acid, whose hydroxymethyl side chain is deprotonated by a histidine that has been bound to aspartate, forming a conserved catalytic triad. Yes. Elsewhere in the enzyme, another serine residue and a glycine form this structure, which stabilizes the deprotonated oxygen in the tetrahedral intermediate formed when the initial serine attacks the substrate.
That catalytic triad.
Answer.
Beige.
Oxyanion whole. 20 points. Toss-up 12. The Washington Post claimed that Barack Obama's head of this agency considered resigning because there are days when I have literally nothing to do. Playing on Italian stereotypes, a head of this cabinet agency mocked a papal opinion on sex by opining, "He no playa the game, he no makea the rules." Pickford v. Glickman entitles African Americans to apply for monetary settlements for this agency's discriminatory loan allocations between 1981 and 1996. This agency switched from pushing buffer stock schemes to get big or get out industrialization during the tenure of Earl Butz. A selectively...
The Department of Agriculture?
Yes.
Well, what is that really racist guy that
Oh,
quoted
yeah,
at
yeah.
Jim's Ryan?
Your bonus, answer the following about the usage of animal noises as melodies for 10 points each. The band Ailstorm released a version of their album No Grave But the Sea that replaced the vocals with this noise. DMX imitates this noise in X Gun Give It To Ya, and it alternates with the title question of a Baha Men hit.
It's a dog barking, right?
Okay.
Dog barking?
Yes. Similarly, this group released a Kickstarter-backed remixed album that replaces its instrumentals with cat sounds. The covers of all three of this hip-hop duo's self-titled albums include two hands shaped like a gun and a fist.
Run the jewels.
Yes. Many YouTube song recreations, as well as the Undertale soundtrack, use the dog and cat noises from this 1992 SNES game's composer feature, in which the user can create music to accompany looping animations.
Some sort of Mario thing.
So 92 would be like Super Mario.
Oh, it's
Super Mario
it's
World.
Mario music.
Answer?
No, but I think it's game.
Super
This
Mario.
is Mario Paint.
Mario.
That's
Oh.
Mario World.
But
it's not the
yeah,
game.
it's not a normal Mario.
Yeah, no,
Class
it's not.
13. A character created by this author describes losing all hope in life after a love interest points out a caterpillar in his hair as he's attempting to kiss her. Another character created by this author shoots out the eyes of a portrait that has a mustache drawn on it and makes minds out of china teapots. In a work by this author, the narrator's friend Serval describes how people from a certain region are asked their names and addresses before being burned to death by Mother Savage. A character created by this author, whose use of the phrase fille d'on has earned him a feminine nickname, is murdered by the prostitute Rachel.
Malpasson.
Yes. Your bonus. Missionaries living in this ruler's empire were negatively impacted by Clement XI's bull Ex Illa Die, which forbade them from accommodating ancestor worship in their rites, for 10 points each. Name this ruler whose foreign policy accomplishments include mediating the Trin Muin Civil War and signing the Treaty of Nerchinsk to conclude disputes with Russia.
It's Qianlong.
I feel like
Qianlong.
Kangxi Emperor. Emperor Kangxi expelled members of this order as a result of the aforementioned Chinese rights controversy. Francis Xavier spread its teachings to India and China.
Jesuits.
This organization, which later operated under the auspices of the Canton system, set up a factory in Amoy in 1678 thanks to Kangxi's policies. Lin Zexu helped spark a war by destroying much of this organization's property.
Like the British East India Company.
I think it's one of them.
Well,
The issue was
yeah.
against Opium.
British East India Company.
Yes. 20. A target value for one form of this quantity that is especially useful during periods of crisis can be found with the McCallum rule. At equilibrium, this quantity equals the quantity provided by the Baumol-Tobin model. The K% rule advocates a constant yearly increase.
Money supply.
Yes.
Yeah.
Name these instruments from their appearances in the Carnival of the Animals, for 10 points each. In the movement, The Cuckoo in the Depths of the Woods, the standard B-flat version of this instrument plays an ostinato over two pianos consisting of the notes C and A-flat. Carl Maria von Weber wrote two concerti for this instrument.
Okay.
Clarinet.
Yes.
Good job.
This string instrument represents the title bird of the movement The Swan, which has been recorded by Pau Casals and Yo-Yo Ma.
I played cello.
Yes. The Aquarium movement was originally scored for piano, strings, and this instrument, although substitutes are frequently employed. Benjamin Franklin invented a new version of this instrument.
He did the glass harmonica thing, right?
Okay.
So like
Harmonica.
I need glass harmonica.
I thought that new
20
version was
points.
the glass. So ergo yeah.
Toss up 15. The finale of a symphony by this composer begins with a decrescendo, followed by the flutes playing a melody marked leggero over eighth note string triplets. This man said that he created a blue sky in A major with a symphony whose finale is the first in the standard repertoire in a minor key. The Andante con moto second movement of that symphony by this composer, according to Ignaz Moscheles, draws on a Czech pilgrim song. To create an alternative movement, third movement for his Symphony No. 1 in C minor, this composer orchestrated the scherzo of his E-flat string octet. The finale of this man's
Mendelssohn.
yes.
Good job.
Bonus. Bertrand Russell wrote an influential critical exposition of this man's work, claiming that his private and public writing espoused two different philosophies, for 10 points each. Name this German philosopher and mathematician who wrote about his belief in windowless substances called monads. He discovered a concept which he called fluxions concurrently with Isaac Newton.
Leibniz.
Leibniz coined this term for attempts to solve the problem of evil. Leibniz's work titled for this concept relies on the principle of sufficient reason and states that we are living in the best of all possible worlds.
Theodicy.
Leibniz's theodicy is often considered a type of theodicy named for this saint, who attacked Gnosticism in his Against Heresies. this philosopher's theodicies are based on God being omnipotent and omnibenevolent.
Irenaeus.
30.
Good job.
Toss-up 16. In its main industrial use, this compound reacts photochemically with nitrosyl chloride to form an oxime that rearranges to generate the nylon precursor caprolactone. Though the proton NMR spectrum of a mostly deuterated derivative of this compound resolves into two signals at around negative 90 degrees Celsius, the spectrum for this compound itself is just a single peak at 1.43 parts per million. This compound eliminates the steric strain caused by the proximity of two flagpole hydrogens by undergoing a very low energy 10.8 kilocalorie pseudo-rotation. Each carbon of this compound is bound to one axial and one equatorial hydrogen in its most stable configuration.
Cyclohexane.
Yes.
I don't eat my hands.
A variant of this model predicts that a fifth gas giant planet was formed and ejected during the evolution of the solar system. For 10 points each, name this model proposed in 2005. According to this model, the late heavy bombardment was caused by outward shifts in the orbits of Uranus and Neptune.
The only model I know is the nice model. Or the Nice model. I don't know what it is, but like the nice model.
Yes, the Nice model. In the Nice model, the original cause of the solar system's instability was an orbital resonance of this ratio between Saturn and Jupiter. The orbital periods of Io and Europa also exhibit this ratio.
This is like the one of the
Answer.
most common ones. It's like 3, 4, 5.
No, 1 to 2.
1 to 2.
The Nice model explains the low mass of this trans-Neptunian region of the solar system, which is the source of short-period comets. Objects that reside here include Cubewanos and the dwarf planet Pluto.
Yeah.
Kuiper Belt.
Yes. 20.
I knew it was in
Toss-up 17. A ruler of this ethnicity aided peasants by establishing charity granaries and regularizing the tax burden leveled by traditional owners of appanages of land won in war called klubi. That ruler of this ethnicity chose not to convert the use of farmland thanks to his Christian wife, Chabi. A princess of this ethnicity, who would only marry a man who beat her in a wrestling match, purportedly fell in love with a ruler of this ethnicity named Ghazan, who converted to Islam. Rulers of this ethnicity were patrons of Rabban Bar Salma, one of many...
Mongol.
Yes. Bonus, when this character's love interest accepts his marriage proposal, he becomes so absurdly, deliriously happy that he wanders the winter streets without a coat, neglects to sleep or eat for days, and finally officially arrives late to his own wedding after forgetting to clean his shirt. 10 points each. Name this character who had earlier devoted himself to farming his property after being initially rejected by Kitty.
So this is from China.
Wasn't this like Prejudice or something?
Oh, is it? Okay.
Answer?
Wickham?
This is Konstantin Dmitrich Levin.
Sorry.
Levin is an autobiographical portrait of this Russian author, who made him the co-protagonist of his novel Anna Karenina.
Yeah.
Later in the novel, Levin attends a disappointing orchestral adaptation of this play in a scene that expresses Tolstoy's own distaste for this play's mirthless jokes and coldly pompous artificial ravings.
I missed the first part.
It's a play that he has, so it's probably like Shakespeare or
Yeah.
some, or like maybe
Maybe like 12.
Answer?
Say
12, 9.
King Lear.
Okay.
10 points.
Jokes.
Toss-up 18. Colin Lau was unusually granted permission to film a ritual named for this object that supposedly began after a race between four-leggeds and two-leggeds to determine who would eat whom. Young men pierced their chest with pins and hooks during that ritual named for this object, which begins...
Sun.
Yes.
It's just the same thing.
Bonus. St. Jerome's against Helvidius maintains that a man with this name was perpetually a virgin, just like his wife. For 10 points each, give this name of the man who buried Jesus' body in a tomb that might have been his own.
Joseph Arimathea.
That man with this name was from Arimathea and appeared in later legends as the keeper of the Grail.
Joseph.
The story of Joseph of Arimathea's imprisonment is recounted in this apocryphal text, usually dated to the 4th century. It is named for a Pharisee who brought myrrh and aloe to embalm Jesus in the Gospel of John.
The Gospel of Nicodemus.
Yes.
Good job.
The Gospel of Nicodemus also recounts this event, which in the Orthodox Church is celebrated by the liturgical colors changing from purple to white.
Or the Hermital.
Yes.
Good 30. Religion. Religion.
That was 30 on the bonus.
We have music. No, I'm just well,
And toss up 19. Regina Gagne's book, The Idols of the Marketplace, argues that this author's work functioned as a protest against the commodification of art through notions of utility. In one work, this author wrote that Watteau would have loved to paint two women who sit in front of a tapestry inspired by Francois Boucher's The Triumph of Love. He analyzed the case of the art critic and serial killer Thomas Griffiths Wainwright in his essay, Pen, Pencil, and Poison. This author compared the response to realism and romanticism to different rages of Caliban in the preface to a work in which the chemist Alan Campbell helps dispose of the body of a murdered painter. In that novel by this author, Lord Henry Wotton watches Basil Hallward.
Oscar Wilde.
Yes. Bonus. In the 1920s, an essayist from this country argued that notions of ethnic superiority could be transcended through the development of a cosmic race, for 10 points each. Name this home country of Jose Vasconcelos. In the Book of Lamentations, Rosario Castellanos fictionalized an indigenous revolt during the creation of ejidos in this country. Mexico. In an essay, Castellanos argued that this woman represents either a traitor or foundress in modern-day thought. Elena Garro's short story, Blame the Tlaxcaltecs, is a modern retelling of this woman's narrative. This is La Malinche. This husband of Elena Garro wrote about Mexican identity in an essay about the sons of La Malinche, which appears in his book The Labyrinth of Solitude. His poetry collection Sunstone was inspired by the Aztec calendar. Yes. 10 points. Toss-up 20. A character with this name is chastised for proposing the division of herding into that of beasts and that of men. Another character with this name is told that his concept of a day must be like a sail covering many people, and thus have many parts. A silent character with this name learns that statesmen are distinguished from sophists through their ability to weave theoretical and practical knowledge from an argument presented by the Eleatic stranger. A character of this name is uniquely not present or mentioned in the laws, and is unable to get Callicles to concede that doing evil is worse than having it done to you, in a dialogue meme for Gorgias. For 10 points, give the name of this character who fails to convince a jury not to execute.
Socrates.
Yes.
Okay. It's like
Last bonus, this leader invoked the Nickel Resolution in an attempt to deny Conrad Black from receiving a peerage, prompting Black to renounce one of his two citizenships. For 10 points each, name this politician who was attacked in an infamous ad asking, "Is this a prime minister?" that triggered backlash due to perceived criticism of this politician's facial features caused by Bell's palsy.
What country are we in?
I think United Kingdom.
positive. Yeah.
Answer.
Heath.
This is Jean Chrétien.
Oh.
In a hilarious 1995 incident, a prank caller pretended to be Chrétien by phoning this person, who laughed when Chrétien said merde or shit during the signing of the 1982 Constitution Act. This person referred to the year 1992 as an annus horribilis.
Yeah, like
Maroni.
This is Queen Elizabeth II.
Oh.
Chrétien told this other prime minister to act now, explain later, when he invoked the War Measures Act to end the October crisis. The son of this popular liberal Quebecer is prime minister today.
Pierre Trudeau.
Yes, for 10 points. What's the final score?
Canada.
485 to 95.
fuck.
Good game, everyone.